Section 0, or preface, of Max Havelaar, or The Coffee Auctions of the Dutch Trading Company, published in 1868. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Max Havelaar by Multatuli, translated by Alphonse Nahuÿs. Preface. Max Havelaar was published a few years ago, and caused such a sensation in Holland as was never before experienced in that country. The author wrote it under the pseudonym of Multatuli, but his real name, Eduardus Dekker, formerly assistant resident of the Dutch government in Java, at once became known. Full of fire and overflowing with enthusiasm, the author presented it to his countrymen in the form of a novel, a book wherein he made them acquainted with the incredible extortions and tyranny of which the natives of the Dutch Indies, that magnificent empire of Insulind, which winds about the equator like a garland of emeralds, are the victims, and how he tried in vain, while still in the service of the government, to put an end to the cruel oppressions that happen every day in those countries. Though some considered his book to be merely an interesting and captivating novel, the author maintained that it contained nothing but facts. He boldly asked the Dutch government to prove the substance of his book to be false, but its truth has never been disputed. At the International Congress for the Promotion of Social Sciences at Amsterdam in 1863, he challenged his countrymen to refute him, but there was no champion to accept the challenge. In short, Mr. Douwes Dekker, who had been a functionary in the service of the Dutch government for the space of 17 years, rather understated than overstated the truth. Not a single fact was ever contested in Holland, and he is still ready to prove his statements. Note 1. Mr. Veth, the well-known learned Orientalist at Leiden, who made a special study of Indian matters, declared that Multatuli understated the truth, and quoted many authors, such as Mr. Vitalis and others, who had published accounts of scenes and facts much more shocking than he had depicted. Mr. Veth complimented Multatuli upon his moderation, saying that he displayed a mastership of art in not exhausting the subject. In the Dutch Parliament nobody answered a single word but Mr. Van Twist, ex-Governor-General of the Dutch Indies, who, on being appealed to by the Baron van Hoffel, said that he could perhaps refute Max Havelaar, but that it was not his interest to do so. The book proves that what was formerly written in Uncle Tom's Cabin of the cruelties perpetrated upon the slaves in America is nothing in comparison to what happens every day in the Dutch Indies. Max Havelaar is the name under which the author chooses to describe his experiences in the East. In the first chapters of the book he has just returned from India, and he meets an old school companion, at that time a coffee broker, a Mr. Driestubel. This Mr. Driestubel is very rich, and the author being just then very poor, the latter asks his old schoolfellow to be security for the publishing of his book. At first Mr. Driestubel will not hear of this, but afterwards, when he perceives that it will be of some advantage to himself, he consents. Driestubel is a very characteristic person, knowing nothing beyond his trade, a great egotist, and is represented by the author with true wit and humor, in order to show the extreme contrast between himself and some of his countrymen, whom he may perhaps have met with since his return from Java. At that time the author wears a plaid or shawl, and Mr. Driestubel therefore speaks always of him as Mr. Shawlman. A few months after the publication of Max Havelaar, one of the most eminent members of the Dutch Parliament avowed that this book had struck the whole country with horror. In vain the Dutch tried to make a party question of it. The author openly declared that he belonged neither to the Liberal nor to the Conservative party, but that he placed himself under the banner of right, equity, and humanity. As soon, however, as he professed to be a mere friend of mankind, without bias to any political party, The official world avoided even to pronounce his name, and affected to have forgotten the man whose conduct had before been considered as a reproof, and whose influence menaced danger to people in place. Instead of accepting the challenge, it seemed more worthy to fight the battle out with the vile weapons of abuse and slander. Of course, the reader will not regard Mr. Dreestable's nonsensical and hypocritical observations as the sentiments of our author. It is precisely Multatuli's intention to make Dreestable odious and his philosophy absurd, though sometimes he speaks truth and common sense, for he is a type of a part of the Dutch nation. So much for the tendency of the book. Need I say that it will do honor to the literature of any language, and that it may be read as well for profit as for amusement? But Max Havelaar is immortal, not because of literary art or talent, but because of the cause he advocates. I think that every one who admires Harriet Beecher Stowe's immortal pleading ought likewise to read Multatuli's accusation. I compare Max Havelaar to Uncle Tom's Cabin, but I do not compare Multatuli, the champion and the martyr of humanity and justice, to Mrs. Stowe, for I am not aware that that lady, with all her merits, has sacrificed future fortune and all that makes life agreeable for a principle, for right and equity, as has been done by Edward Douas Dekker. Max Havelaar bears evidence of having been written by a genius of that order which only appears at long intervals in the world's history. His mind embraces in its intellectual compass all mankind, regardless of race or caste. By the diffusion of this book a bond will be formed embracing all lovers of genius and justice throughout the world. It was the intention of the author to have had his book translated into all the European languages. Unfortunately, he unwittingly disposed of the property of his own book, and if it had not thus been legally withheld from the people of Holland, it is probable that I should not have been its translator. But I have been constrained to make known as widely as possible the sad truth regarding the maladministration of laws, in themselves good, by the Dutch government in her Indian dependencies. To the British nation the facts will be new, as the books published in England on Dutch India are few in number, superficial in character, and give no idea of the condition of the native population. I cannot judge of English politics or about British India, but however perfect British rule may be, it cannot be so perfect that it has nothing more to learn. Alphonse Johann Bernard Horstmar Nahuys, The Hague, January 17, 1868. To Everdine Hubert, Baroness Weinbergen. J'ai souvent entendu plaindre les femmes des poètes, et sans doute, pour tenir dignement dans la vie ce difficile emploi, aucune qualité n'est de trop. Le plus rare ensemble de mérites n'est que le strict nécessaire, et ne suffit même pas toujours au commun bonheur. Voir sans cesse la muse entière dans vos plus familiers entretiens, recueillir dans ses bras et soigner ce poète qui est votre mari, quand il vous revient meurtri par les déceptions de sa tâche, ou bien le voir s'envoler à la poursuite de sa chimère. Voilà l'ordinaire de l'existence pour une femme de poète. Oui, mais aussi il y a le chapitre des compensations, l'heure des lauriers qu'il a gagné à la sueur de son génie, et qu'il dépose puissamment aux pieds de la femme légitimement aimée, aux genoux de l'Antigone, qui sert de guide en ce monde à cet aveugle errant. Car, ne vous y trompez pas, presque tous les petits-fils d'Homère sont plus ou moins aveugles à leur façon. Ils voient ce que nous ne voyons pas. Leur regard pénètre plus haut et plus au fond que les nôtres. Mais ils ne savent pas voir droit devant eux, leur petit bonhomme de chemin, et ils seraient capables de trébucher et de se casser le nez sur les moindres cailloux. s'il leur fallait cheminer sans soutien dans ces vallées de prose où demeure la vie. Henri de Penne. Officer. My lord, this is the man who murdered Betsy. Judge. He must hang for it. How did he do it? Officer. He cut up her body in little pieces and salted them. Judge. He is a great criminal. He must hang for it. Lothario. My lord, I did not murder Betsy. I fed and clothed and cherished her. I can call witnesses who will prove me to be a good man and no murderer. Judge. You must hang. You blacken your crime by your self-sufficiency. It ill becomes one who is accused of anything to set up for a good man. Lothario. But, my lord, there are witnesses to prove it. And as I am now accused of murder, Judge, you must hang for it. You cut up Betsy, you salted the pieces, and you are satisfied with your conduct. 3 capital counts. Who are you, my good woman? Woman. I am Betsy. Lothario. Thank God. You see, my lord, that I did not murder her. Judge. Humph. What about the salting? Betsy. No, my lord, he did not salt me. On the contrary, he did many things for me. He is a worthy man. Lothario. You hear, my lord? She says I am an honest man. Judge. Humph. The 3rd count remains. Officer, remove the prisoner. He must hang for it. He is guilty of self-conceit. Unpublished play. End of preface. Chapter 1 of Max Havelaar by Multatuli, translated by Alphonse Nahuÿs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 1. I am a coffee broker, and I live at number 37 Laurier Canal, Amsterdam. I am not accustomed to write novels or works of that kind. Therefore it took me a long time before I could resolve to order a few extra quires of paper and begin this book, which you, dear reader, have just taken in hand, and which you must finish whether you are a coffee broker or anything else. Not only that I never wrote anything that resembled a novel, but I even do not like to read such things, because I am a man of business. For many years I have asked myself, what is the use of such works? And I am astonished at the impudence with which many a poet or novelist dares to tell you stories which never happened, and often never could have happened at all. If I, in my position, I am a coffee broker, and live at number 37 Laurier Canal, made a statement to a principal, that is, a person who sells coffee, in which I related only a small part of the lies which form the greater part of poems and novels, he would immediately cease to employ me, and go over to Busselinck and Waterman, who are likewise coffee brokers, but you need not know their address. Therefore I take good care not to write any novels, nor to advance any false statements. I have always remarked that persons who do so are often badly off. I am 43 years of age. I have visited the Exchange for the last 20 years, and, therefore, I can come forward whenever you are in want of a person of experience. How many firms do I know which have been utterly ruined, and generally when looking for the causes of their failure, it appeared to me that they must be attributed to the wrong direction which most of them followed in the beginning. My maxims are, and will always be, truth and common sense, making, of course, an exception with regard to the Holy Scriptures. The origin of this fault may be traced to our children's poet, van Alphen. Note number 1. Hieronymus van Alphen, author of Little Poems for Children, etc., was born in 1746 and died in 1803. In his very first line about dear little babies, what the deuce could make that old gentleman declare himself to be an adorer of my little sister Gertrude, who had weak eyes, or of my brother Gerard, who always played with his nose, and yet he says that he sang those poems inspired by love. I often thought when a child, my dear fellow, I should like to meet you once, and if you refused me the marbles which I should ask you for, or the initials of my name in chocolate (my name is Batavus), then I should believe you to be a liar. But I never saw Van Alphen. He was dead, I think. When he told us that my father was my best friend, and that my little dog was so grateful. We never kept any dogs, they are so very dirty, although I was much fonder of little Paul Vincer, who lived near us in Batavia Street. All lies, and yet in this manner education goes on. The new little sister came from the vegetable woman in a big cabbage. All Dutchmen are brave and generous. The Romans were glad that the Batavians allowed them to live. The Bey of Tunis got a colic when he heard the Dutch colors flapping. The Duke of Alva was a monster. Note number 2. See the History of Holland. The ebb tide, in 1672, I believe, lasted a little longer than usual, only to protect the Netherlands. Nonsense! Holland has remained Holland because our forefathers knew how to manage their affairs, and because they had the true religion. That is the reason. And then came other lies. A girl is an angel. Whoever first discovered that never had any sisters. Love is a bliss. You fly with some dear object or other to end of the earth. The earth has no end, and such love is all nonsense. Nobody can say that I do not live on good terms with my wife. She is a daughter of Last & Company, coffee brokers. Nobody can find fault with our marriage. I am a member of the fashionable Artis Club. Note: a club at the Zoological Gardens whose motto is Artis Natura Magistra. And she has an Indian shawl which cost £7 13 shillings 4 pence. But yet we never indulged in such a foolish love as would have urged us to fly to the extremities of the earth. When we married we made an excursion to The Hague. We there bought some flannel, of which I still wear shirts, and further our love has never driven us. So I say it is all nonsense and lies. And should my marriage now be less happy than that of those persons who out of pure love become consumptive, or tear the hair out of their heads? Or do you think that my household is less orderly than it would be if 17 years ago I had promised my bride in verse that I should marry her? Stuff and nonsense! Yet I could have done such a thing as well as anyone else, for the making of verses is a profession certainly less difficult than ivory turning. Otherwise how could bonbons with mottos be so cheap? Only compare their price with that of 2 billiard balls. I have no objection to verses. If you like to put the words into a line, very well, but do not say anything beyond the truth. Thus, the clock strikes 4, and it rains no more. I will not say anything against that. If it is indeed 4 o'clock, and it has really stopped raining. But if it is 2:45, then I, who do not put my words in verse, can say, it is 2:45, and it has stopped raining. But the rhymer, because it rains no more, is bound to say 4. Either the time or the weather must be changed, and a lie is the result. and it is not rhyming alone that allures young people to untruth. Go to the theater and listen to all the lies they tell you. The hero of the piece is saved from being drowned by a person who is on the point of becoming a bankrupt. Then, as we are told, he gives his preserver half his fortune, a statement that cannot be true, as I proceed to show. When lately my hat was blown by the wind into the Prinsen Canal, I gave the man twopence who brought it back to me, and he was satisfied. I know very well that I ought to have given a little more if he had saved my own self from drowning, but certainly not half my fortune, for it is evident that in such a case falling twice into the water would quite ruin me. The worst of these scenes on the stage is that people become so much accustomed to untruths that they get into the habit of admiring and applauding them. I should like to throw all such applauders into the water, to see how many of them really meant that applause. I, who love truth, hereby give notice that I won't pay half my fortune for being fished up. He who is not satisfied with less need not touch me. On Sundays only I should give a little more, on account of my gold chain and best coat. Yes, many persons become corrupted by the stage, much more than by novels, for seeing is believing. With tinsel and lace cut out in paper, all looks so very attractive, that is to say, for children, and men who are not accustomed to business, and even when they want to represent poverty, their representation is generally a lie. A girl whose father has become a bankrupt works to support her family. Very well, you see her on the stage sewing, knitting, or embroidering. Now do count the stitches which she makes during a whole act. She talks, she sighs, she runs to the window, she does everything except work. Surely the family that can live by such work needs very little. This girl is, of course, the heroine. She has pushed some seducers downstairs, and cries continually, "Oh, mother, mother!" and thus she represents virtue. A nice virtue indeed, which takes a year in making a pair of stockings. Does not all this serve to give you false ideas of virtue, and of labor for daily bread? All folly and lies. Then her first lover, who was formerly a copying clerk, but is now immensely rich, returns suddenly and marries her. Lies again. He who has money does not marry a bankrupt's daughter. You think that such a scene will do on the stage, as an exceptional case, but the audience will mistake the exception for the rule, and thus become demoralized by accustoming themselves to applaud on the stage that which in the world every respectable broker or merchant considers to be ridiculous madness. When I was married, we were 13 of us at the office of my father-in-law, Last & Company, and a good deal of business was done there, I can assure you. And now for more lies on the stage. When the hero walks away in a stiff, stage-like manner to serve his native country, why does the back door always open of itself? And then this virtue rewarded. Oh, I have been these 17 years a coffee broker at No. 37 Laurier Canal, and I have had a great deal of experience, but I am always much shocked when I see the dear, good truth so distorted. Rewarded virtue, forsooth! Just as if virtue was a trade commodity. It is not so in the world, and it is very good that it is not so, for where would be the real merit if virtue were always rewarded? Why then always invent such shameful lies? There is, for instance, Lucas, the warehouse porter, who had been in the employ of Last & Company's father. The firm was then Last & Meyer, but Meyers are no longer in it. He was really an honest man, in my opinion. Never was a single coffee bean missing. He went to church very punctually, and was a teetotaler. When my father-in-law was at his country seat at Driebergen, this man kept the house, the cash, and everything. Once the bank paid him 17 guilders too much, and he returned them. He is now too old and gouty to work, and therefore starves, for our large business transactions require young men. Well, this Lucas has been a very virtuous man, but is he rewarded? Does a prince give him diamonds, or a fairy nice dinners? Certainly not. He is poor, and he remains poor, and that must be so. I cannot help him. We want young, active men for our extensive business. But if I could do anything for him, his merit would be rewarded in an easy life, now that he is old. Then if all warehouse porters, and everybody else, became virtuous, all would be rewarded in this world, and there would remain no special reward for the good people hereafter. But on the stage they distort everything, turn everything into lies. I, too, am virtuous, but do I ask a reward for that? When my affairs go on well, as they generally do, when my wife and children are healthy, so that I have nothing to do with doctors, when I can put aside every year a small sum for old age, when Fred behaves well, that he may be able to take my place when I retire to my country seat near Driebergen, then I am quite satisfied. But all this is only a natural consequence of circumstances, and because I attend to my business. I claim nothing for my virtue, and that I am a virtuous man is evident from my love for truth, which is second only to my great inclination to my faith. I should like to convince you of this, dear reader, because it is my excuse for writing this book. Another passion equally strong is my love of business. I am a coffee broker at No. 37 Laurier Canal. Well, reader, this book owes its existence to my inviolable love for truth and my zeal for business. I will tell you how all this has happened. But as I must now leave you for some time, being obliged to go to the Exchange, I invite you to a second chapter. Pray take this with you. It may be of service to you. Look here, my card. I am the co. since the Myers went out. Old Last is my father-in-law. Last & Co., Coffee Brokers, No. 37 Laurier Canal. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Max Havelaar by Multatuli, translated by Alphonse Nahuÿs. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. Business is slack on the Coffee Exchange. The spring auction will make it right again. Don't suppose, however, that we have nothing to do. At Busselink and Waterman's trade is slacker still. It is a strange world, this. One gets a deal of experience by frequenting the Exchange for 20 years. Only fancy that they have tried, I mean Busselink and Waterman, to do me out of the custom of Ludwig Stern. As I do not know whether you are familiar with the Exchange, I will tell you that Stern is an eminent coffee merchant in Hamburg, who always employed Last & Company. Quite accidentally I found that out. I mean that bungling business of Busselink and Waterman. They had offered to reduce the brokerage by 1/4 per cent. They are low fellows, nothing else. And now look what I have done to stop them. Any one in my place would perhaps have written to Ludwig Stern that we two would diminish the brokerage and that we hoped for consideration on account of the long services of Last & Company. I have calculated that our firm, during the last 50 years, has gained 400,000 guilders by Stern. Our connection dates from the beginning of the continental system, when we smuggled colonial produce and such like things from Helgoland. No, I won't reduce the brokerage. I went to Poland Coffee House, ordered pen and paper, and wrote that because of the many honored commissions received from North Germany, our business transaction had been extended. It is the simple truth, and that this necessitated an augmentation of our staff. It is the truth, no more than yesterday evening our bookkeeper was in the office after 11 o'clock to look for his spectacles, that, above all things, we were in great want of respectable, educated young men to conduct the German correspondence, that certainly there were many young Germans in Amsterdam who possessed the requisite qualifications, but that a respectable firm (it is the very truth), seeing the frivolity and immorality of young men, and the daily increasing number of adventurers, and with an eye to the necessity of making correctness of conduct go hand in hand with correctness in the execution of orders, it is the truth, observe, and nothing but the truth, that such a firm, I mean Last & Company, coffee brokers, 37 Laurier Canal, could not be anxious enough in engaging new hands. All that is the simple truth, reader. Do you know that the young German who always stood at the Exchange, near the 17th pillar, has eloped with the daughter of Busselinck and Waterman? Our Mary, like her, will be 13 years old in September. That I had the honor to hear from Mr. Saffeler travels for Stern, that the honored head of the firm, Ludwig Stern, had a son, Mr. Ernest Stern, who wished for employment for some time in a Dutch house. That I, mindful of this, here I referred again to the immorality of employés, and also to the history of that daughter of Busselinck and Waterman. It won't do any harm to tell it. That I, mindful of this, wish with all my heart to offer Mr. Ernst Stern the German correspondence of our firm. From delicacy I avoided all allusion to honorarium or salary. Yet I said that if Mr. Ernest Stern would like to stay with us at 37 Laurier Canal, my wife would care for him as a mother, and have his linen mended in the house. That is the very truth, for Mary sews and knits very well, and in conclusion I said that we were a religious family. The last sentence may do good, for the Sterns are Lutherans. I posted that letter. You understand that old Mr. Stern could not very well give his custom to Busselinck and Waterman if his son were in our office. I am very anxious for a reply. But to return to my book. Some time ago I walked one evening through Culver Street, and stopped looking into a shop where a grocer was diligently sorting a quantity of Java middling fine yellow Cherrybon coffee, slightly damaged, which interested me much, for I am very inquisitive. Suddenly I observed a gentleman standing next to me in front of a bookseller's shop, whom I thought I had seen before, though I endeavored in vain to recollect him. He, too, seemed to recognize me, for every moment we looked at one another. I must confess that I really was too much interested in the adulterated coffee immediately to observe what I saw afterwards, viz., that his clothes were very shabby. Otherwise I should not have taken any notice of him. But all of a sudden I thought, perhaps he is a commercial traveler for a German firm which is in need of a trustworthy broker. He had rather a German face, and appeared something of a traveler, too. He was very fair, with blue eyes, and had something about him which made you think that he was a foreigner. Instead of a respectable winter coat he wore a shawl, or plaid, and looked as if he had just ended a long journey. I thought I saw a customer, and gave him an address card. Last & Company Coffee Brokers, 37 L'Oreal Canal. He took it, and holding it near the gaslight, looked at it, and said, "I thank you, but I was mistaken. I thought I had the pleasure of seeing an old schoolfellow, but that is not the right name." "Well, excuse me," I said, for I am always polite. "I am Mr. Dreistable, Batavus Dreistable. Last & Company is the firm coffee brokers at number 37 L'Oreal Canal. Well, Dreistable, don't you know me? Look at me straight in the face." The more I looked him in the face, the more I remembered having seen him before, but, strange to say, his face made an impression on me as if I smelt foreign perfumes. Do not laugh at that, reader. By and by you will see how that was. I feel quite assured that he had not a drop of perfumery about him, and yet I smelt something very strong, something which reminded me of— Then I knew him. "Was it you," I said, "who rescued me from the Greek?" "To be sure," said he. "And how are you?" I told him that we were 13 of us in our office, and that we had plenty to do, and then I asked him how he had got on, which I felt quite sorry for afterwards, for it appeared that his pecuniary circumstances were not prosperous, and I dislike poor people, because it is for the most part their own fault, as the Lord would not forsake a person who had served him faithfully. If I had only said, "We are 13 of us, and I wish you good night," then I should have got rid of him. But these questions and replies made it every minute more difficult to shake him off. However, I must confess that if I had shaken him off you would not have had this book to read, for it owes its existence to that meeting. I like to look at the bright side of everything, and those who do not are discontented creatures. I can't bear them. Yes, it was the same person who had rescued me out of the clutches of the Greek. Don't think, however, that I had been taken prisoner by pirates, or that I had had a brawl in the Levant. I have told you already that I went, after my marriage, with my wife to The Hague, where we saw the museum, and bought flannel in Veen Street, the only excursion that my extensive business at Amsterdam ever allowed me. No, it was on my account that he gave a Greek a bloody nose, for all was interfering with other people's business. It was in the year 1834, I think, and in September, the annual fair time at Amsterdam. As my parents intended to make a clergyman of me, I learned Latin. Afterwards I often wondered why you must understand Latin to say in Dutch, "God is good." Enough. I went to the Latin school, now called the Gymnasium, and there was the fair, in Amsterdam, I mean. On the Wester Market were booths, and if you, reader, are an Amsterdammer, and about my age, you will remember that in one of them was a most beautiful girl with black eyes, dressed as a Greek. Her father, too, was a Greek, or at least he had the appearance of a Greek. They sold all sorts of perfumes. I was just old enough to think the girl very beautiful, without having the courage to speak to her. Such an attempt would have been fruitless, for a girl of 18 thinks a boy of 16 a child, and there she is quite right. Yet we schoolboys always went to the Wester Market to see that girl. Now, he who stood before me with the plaid was once with us, though some years younger than the rest, and therefore too childish to look at the Grecian girl. But he was dux of our class, for he was very clever, that I must confess, and he was very fond of playing, romping, and fighting, therefore he was with us. While we looked from a distance at the Grecian girl, I think we were 10 of us, and deliberated how we should set about making acquaintance with her, we made up our minds to put our money together to buy something. But then it was very difficult to know who should be so bold as to speak to the girl. Every one liked it, but no one dared attempt it. We cast lots, and I was chosen. Now, I confess that I do not like to brave dangers. I am a husband and a father, and think every one who braves danger to be a fool. This you may read in the Bible. It is a great satisfaction for me to find that I think about danger and such like things exactly as I did many years ago. I have still the same opinion as I had on that very evening when I stood close to the Greek's booth, with the 12 pence we had put together in my hand. But because of false shame, I dared not say that I had not the courage to do it. Besides, I had to advance against my will, for my companions pushed me, and soon I was standing before the booth. I did not see the girl. I saw nothing. All became green and yellow before my eyes. I stammered out the first aorist of I do not know which verb. "Plaît-il?" said she. I recovered a little and continued, "Mening Aethia, and that Egypt was a present from the Nile." I feel quite sure that I should have made her acquaintance if one of my companions had not at that moment given me such a punch in the back that I stumbled with much violence against the booth. I felt a grasp at my neck, a second one much lower, and before I had time to think about my position, I was inside the tent with the Greek, who told me in very intelligible French that I was a gammon, and that he would call the police. Now, I was very near the girl, but it gave me no pleasure at all. I cried and prayed for mercy, for I was much afraid. But there was no help for it. The Greek took hold of my arm and kicked me. I looked for my comrades. We had just read that morning about Scaevola, who put his hand in the fire, and in our Latin themes we thought it so fine and so elevated. Pooh! Nobody stayed to put his hand in the fire for me, so I thought. But all of a sudden our friend of the plaid, or shawl man, as we shall call him, rushed through the back entrance into the booth. He was then neither tall nor strong, and only 13 years old, but he was a brave and nimble little fellow. I still see the sparkling of his eyes. He gave the Greek a blow with his fist, and I was saved. Afterwards I heard that the Greek drubbed him soundly, but as I have a steady principle never to meddle with other people's business, I ran away immediately, and so I did not see it. That is the reason why his face reminded me so much of perfumes, and how easy it is in Amsterdam to quarrel with a Greek. Afterwards, whenever that man was with his booth on the Wester Market, I always went elsewhere to amuse myself. As I am very fond of philosophical observations, I must be allowed to remark how strangely all things hang together in this world. If the eyes of that girl had been lighter, if her tresses had been shorter, or the boys had not pushed me against the booth, you would not now be reading this book. Therefore be thankful for all that happened. Believe me, everything in the world is good, as it is, and those discontented men who are always full of complaints are not my friends. There you have Busselinck and Waterman. But I must go on, for I have to finish my book before the great spring coffee auction. To speak the truth, for I like truth, I felt it very unpleasant to meet that person again. I saw in a moment that he was not an acquaintance to be proud of. He looked very pale, and when I asked him what o'clock it was, he didn't know. These things a man observes who has frequented the Exchange for 20 years or so, and transacted business there. I've witnessed many a crash. I thought he would turn to the right, and therefore I went to the left, but lo, he too turned to the left, and so I was in for a conversation with him. But I bore in mind that he did not know what o'clock it was, and perceived at the same time that his coat was buttoned up to his chin, which is a very bad sign, so I did not speak much. He told me that he had been in India, that he was married, and had children. All very well, but this was not very interesting to me. At the Kappelsteig (Butterfly Lane), I never before went through that Steig (lane), because it is not considered respectable, but this time I intended to turn to the right and pass through the Kappelsteig. I waited till that little street was just behind us to make him understand that his way was straight on, and then I said very politely, for I am always polite, one never knows whether he may not afterwards want to use a person, "I am very much pleased that I have seen you again, sir, and good-bye. I have to go this way." Then he looked like an idiot at me and sighed, and all of a sudden took hold of one of the buttons of my coat. "Dear Dreistable," said he, "I have to ask you something." I trembled all over. He did not know what o'clock it was, and had to ask me something. Of course I replied I had no time to spare and had to go to the Exchange, though it was evening. But if you have frequented the Exchange for some 20 years, and a person asks you something without knowing what o'clock it is, I disengaged the button, bade him farewell in a polite manner, for I am always polite, and went through the Kappelsteig, which I otherwise never do, because it is not fashionable, and fashionableness I like above all things. I hope that nobody saw me. End of chapter 2.